The story begins with a group of heroes attempting to prevent the end of the world. As humanity's last hope, they ultimately fail. Evan, their leader, offers an apology, admitting he is not up to the task. With deep regret, he confesses that Chris should have been the true hero. A girl interrupts him, asking him not to say that. She then adds sorrowfully that they have done all they could. He responds by pointing out that if the brilliant Chris had learned swordsmanship earlier, he could have surpassed the 9th level, reached the 10th, and stopped the apocalypse. Chris, known as the Great Extra, is the protagonist of the story, and he earns this title thanks to his absurd ability to master anything at an incredible speed, regardless of the field. His story begins at the age of 20, a young man with dreams of success who has fled his broken family and lives in the slums. Around that time, humanity comes under attack from the Magic Empire, led by the Demon Emperor. A public call is made for assistance to join the heroes' party that will stand against the invasion. Chris sees this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity he cannot afford to miss. Without hesitation, he signs up, dreaming of the riches that will be his if they succeed. But unfortunately, they are defeated, and the forces of light fall to the Demon Emperor. The scene now returns to Chris and Evan, who wishes he could go back in time and choose Chris as the hero from the start. He, however, firmly rejects that idea, having no desire to relive such a bitter life. Besides, time travel isn't possible to begin with. The three share a final look at the world crumbling before them, and at that moment, he realizes this truly is the end. As his body begins to fade, he mocks the idea of a second life, and idly wishes he had been born the son of a rich man, if such a new life were real. And then it happens. He wakes up in the body of a young noble within the Magic Empire. The family he belongs to hails from the Dark Mega bloodline, one of the 12 noble houses that support the Empire. Upon investigation, he discovers he has gone back 15 years in time. This means he is only 5 years before the Demon Emperor's invasion begins. Even though he believes he's seen it all in his previous life, he doesn't expect to look out his window and see demons gardening. What unsettles him most is that he recognizes the identity of the person whose body he now inhabits. His name is Christian Van Baron Kazar. He remembers hearing a friend mention that name before. He immediately understands that the Van indicates a lesser demonic bloodline. His friend had praised his sharp mind and explained that the Kazar family is a branch of the Baron household, part of the infamous Dark Mega line. He asks if that means the Kazar family is minor. She replies no, and clarifies that even as a branch family, they are still considered part of the Dark Mega line. And given their wealth, there isn't a single demon in the Empire unfamiliar with the name Kazar. She goes on to say that the Kazar family has 2 heirs. The elder son, Chris, is a complete scoundrel in every sense, a disgrace of a young man who does nothing but cause trouble, to the point his family has lost all hope in him. But that is in the past, she adds, prompting Chris to ask if she means he has changed. Her answer is blunt. He has been killed by his own family. The scene returns to the present, where he is horrified by the fate of the man whose life he now leads. He slams his fist against the wall, overwhelmed by the irony of having wished to be the son of a rich man. He begins to wonder why he has been brought back to life, and why in this specific place. And above all, why he has to end up in the body of a wretch who has only moments left to live. He sinks into despair, trying to calm himself so he can find a way out of this impossible situation. Time passes, and it has now been 3 days since he regained consciousness in the body of the young man who shares his name, the same one who is supposed to be killed 2 years from now. He considers the possibility that the family might have executed him for being a scoundrel who committed terrible acts. So perhaps behaving properly could help him avoid such a fate. Now that he is the son of a wealthy man, he believes he might finally live the life he has always dreamed of. But just then, something critical crosses his mind. Something he has forgotten. And that realization crushes any hope of fulfilling that dream. The matter is Ragnarok, or the end of the world. He remembers that the Demon Emperor's motive for starting the war is to activate Ragnarok by offering humans as sacrifices. Because he had failed to uncover this purpose in his previous life, both the forces of light and the Magic Empire were utterly destroyed. Now he knows that his survival depends on preventing that destruction. Although the Demon Emperor himself is an enormous threat, the greater danger lies in the vast number of demons loyal to him within the Magic Empire. If he is to win, he must surpass the Demon Emperor. And the only way to do that is to become the new demon emperor and rise to the top of the magic empire. At present, he still has 5 years before the invasion begins. He wonders if he should take the chance. After all, if he does nothing, death is inevitable. Besides, if he succeeds, he won't just own a mansion, he will rule the entire empire. Later on, he finds himself in his father's office. The moment his father sees him, his anger flares. He yells at him, reminding him that he was told to stay in his room and reflect on his actions. But instead, he has the nerve to show up without shame after the disaster he caused. His fury grows as he threatens to behead him if he behaves so foolishly again. Under the heavy pressure from his father, Count Khazar, he responds that he came to apologize for all his past mistakes. His goal is to erase his old image as a disgrace, so he can carry out his plan. Count Khazar is taken aback by his words, and Chris repeats his apology, assuring him that his behavior will not be repeated. But the Count remains unconvinced, insisting that such a sudden change is unbelievable given all the damage he has caused. He is disheartened, unable to figure out which of the many disasters is bothering his father most. He reminds him that 3 days ago he mentioned losing part of his memory, and in trying to recall his past, he realizes how awful he had been, which is why his regret is genuine this time. Still uneasy, Count Khazar says he has heard similar words too many times before. Chris insists that this time is different, admitting that an apology alone won't fix anything, and he asks to be sent to the punishment wing for a full month to reflect and prove his sincerity. The punishment wing is a prison for high-ranking demons who commit serious crimes. It is a place untouched by light, where all 5 senses are sealed. Even a few days there are enough to break anyone, but he sees it as the perfect place to disappear from sight. Count Khazar asks if he's sure, warning him that someone like him won't last even half a day. Chris responds that he knows how harsh the place is, but sees it as necessary to prove how serious he is. Khazar asks if he knows how many times he's made similar promises only to let them down again. Even so, he agrees to give him one last chance to see what will happen. But he makes it clear that if he fails to show real change by the end of the month, he will be expelled from the family for good. Chris is fully aware of what that means. Without his family's protection, many would jump at the chance to kill him, and they won't hesitate. Even so, he responds immediately and confidently, telling his father that he agrees. However, he adds a condition. If he proves he has truly changed, there will be something he will ask of him. His father is irritated by his confident tone, remarking that he sounds as if he's certain he'll return unharmed. Still, he agrees to grant his request. If he keeps his word, he then leaves the office, convinced that he will never last. Sometime later, he sits in his room, holding something that looks like a gem in his hand. Cox, the family's servant, enters and informs him that the punishment wing is ready for his arrival. Chris places the gem on the table and leaves with him. On the way, he hears the servants whispering about him. They can't believe the family's disgrace is willingly heading to the punishment wing. They wonder what new scheme he's planning this time. Chris is drawn to their mention of a recent incident in which he insulted the young lady from the toxic mega family, an event that forced Count Khazar to personally apologize, despite the rivalry between the two families. This left him in an extremely bad light and severely damaged his reputation. One servant sighs, wondering when that disgrace will finally grow up, and another replies that such a thing is utterly impossible. They then speculate on how long he'll last in the punishment wing. One says 2 days at most. Another argues he won't even make it through a single day. They continue on until they reach the punishment wing, where 2 intimidating guards stand at the entrance. Chris glances at one of them with curiosity, thinking to himself that employing Death Knights as guards is typical in the Magic Empire. Still, he doesn't care as long as they're not coming in with him. So he keeps walking. Just before he enters, a voice calls out to him, "Brother." He turns to see a young boy standing behind him. He feels like he's seen him before. It's his younger brother, Thurn, known as the model student. Chris is caught off guard when Thurn suddenly draws a sword on him. Despite a surge of inner fear, he composes himself and calmly asks what he wants. Thurn shouts, accusing him of being a constant disgrace to the family. He adds that, though he doesn't know what he's planning this time, if he shames the family again, he will kill him. At that moment, Chris realizes that the body's original owner was indeed killed by him, and he remembers meeting him during the invasion, where he had become a well-known demon skilled in curse magic. He notes that Thurn looks quite innocent at this age and figures he must have trained hard. Even so, to someone like Chris, who survived the Age of Ruin, he's still just a child. With a serious tone, he tells him to lower his sword. Thurn grows uneasy. Something feels off. Chris leaves him with a simple statement. He gets the message and urges him to mind his own business. Thurn tries to issue another warning, but Chris ignores him and steps into the punishment wing. Frustrated by the embarrassing exchange, Thurn yells furiously. Inside the punishment wing, he begins testing his senses. He finds he can't hear or see, though there's a faint sensation in his fingertips. He realizes his father must have allowed this minimal feeling so he could touch the items he brought with him. Otherwise, he would starve. He knows that any ordinary person would lose their mind in a place like this, but not him. He has faced worse while working as a treasure hunter, and the deprivation of his senses actually works in his favor, giving him the chance to focus inwardly without distraction. In doing so, he can begin repairing the damaged body he now inhabits, though the process will require immense time and effort, thanks to the medical skills he gained during his time under a saint. The body modification techniques he picked up from the circus and the various mana stones in his possession, he believes he can achieve his goal. He pulls out one of the mana stones, admitting that he never imagined he'd get his hands on one due to their outrageous price. But then again, it's only natural for a noble family to fulfill even the whims of a disgrace like the one who used to own this body. He feels a pang of regret as he remembers how much he and Evan had suffered just to get their hands on a mana stone like the one he's holding now. At that moment, he decides to begin his plan, starting with purifying his body using a white mana stone. Though the process is tedious, it's also the most crucial step, as he must cleanse all the areas where waste is built up in his body, using pure white mana. One mistake during this phase could destroy his body completely. Not long after, he smiles. He successfully completes the purification, and with surprising ease. The scene shifts to Count Khazar's office, where he asks Cox about Chris. Cox informs him that he voluntarily enters the punishment wing. Khazar feels uneasy, wondering if he has mentally broken down to the point where he can no longer ask for help, and regrets letting him go. He recalls how he had once been such a promising child. But then, little by little, things begin to fall apart. He wonders if pride in his talents has been his undoing. Still, he doesn't dwell on the thought long, telling himself it would be better for him to end up crippled, or even dead, than to keep living the way he was. But then, the determined look he saw on his face resurfaces in his memory, stirring something in him. Even so, as he reflects on all the times he has been deceived, he concludes this time is likely no different. He asks Cox if anything strange happened when Chris entered the punishment wing. Noticing his hesitation, he urges him to speak honestly without hiding anything. Cox explains that Chris has taken a collection of mana stones with him, including a hallucination stone known to cause delusions. Given their uncertainty about the potential side effects, Cox suggests opening the punishment wing to check on him. Khazar's expression shifts to anger, and he insists that even if Chris is dying, the door will not be opened. Time passes, and after a month, Khazar stands before the punishment wing's entrance. He imagines what state Chris must be in. If he's even alive, he must be a wreck. But what he sees takes him by surprise. Chris emerges in excellent condition, showing no signs of suffering. He asks him why he's so surprised, and reminds him that he promised to change, and he kept his word. Khazar is visibly moved as he notices a look in his eyes he hasn't seen since he was a child. Composing himself, he states plainly that it's clear he has survived. Chris laughs, asking if that was meant as a compliment. Khazar snaps at him not to get cocky just for doing something so basic. Chris agrees, though he's quietly frustrated by his father's harshness. Even so, he feels satisfied, not just for surviving, but for achieving so much over the month. He has managed to reshape his body into one perfectly suited for swordsmanship, and thanks to the white mana stone, he feels vitality coursing through every cell. As for the hallucination stone, it turns out to be a stroke of genius. Though Cox scolds him for using what is essentially a classified narcotic, it helps him drastically shorten the time needed for his full transformation. He also succeeds in creating 2 cores, making him a first-level light mage. He even conceals the light core within a dark core to avoid detection. Discovery would be disastrous. He tells his father that since he kept his promise, he has a request. When Khazar asks what it is, Chris requests permission to use the Black Forest Knights training grounds. Khazar grows visibly irritated upon hearing the request, telling him that place is not meant for someone like him. It's one of the three main facilities that support the Dark Mega family, and only elite knights are allowed to use it to hone and showcase their skills. Chris clarifies that he's not asking for more than access to the grounds, and believes witnessing the courage of the Black Forest Knights will be a great source of inspiration. His father considers his words for a moment, then agrees, but warns him not to show weakness in front of the Black Forest Knights. As Khazar turns to leave, Chris stops him, saying he has one more request. Time passes, and the scene shifts to the Black Forest Knights' training grounds. Three knights appear, looking curiously at a certain individual. That individual is revealed to be Chris, preparing to begin his training. He notices the gazes the young men throw his way, but he knows full well that being the Count's son isn't enough to earn their respect. Strength matters more than status in the Magic Empire. He has another reason for coming to the Black Forest Knights' headquarters besides using the training grounds. That reason is the library, his second request to his father. However, his father makes it conditional upon obtaining a recommendation letter from Vice Commander Melon before granting him a key. The library is where the Khazar family stores their black magic tomes, and access to it is of great importance to him. When he protests, arguing that he has the right to enter as a family member, his father reminds him of the last time he was caught trying to steal the most valuable books to sell on the black market. That's when Chris realizes the body's previous owner was truly a scoundrel. Still, he doesn't take offense, as he already has a solid plan to earn Vice Commander Melon's recognition quickly. At that moment, his brother Thurn suddenly appears before him, surrounded by a group of young men, telling him this place isn't meant for a pest like him. Chris is annoyed by Thurn confronting him again, and decides to ignore him. But then he pauses, smiling, as an idea comes to mind. His appearance couldn't have been more timely. Thurn approaches him with a sharp tone, telling him to leave unless he intends to die after barely surviving the punishment wing by sheer luck. Chris responds calmly, asking if he is ready to take responsibility for those words, then surprises him by stating that it's their father who gave him permission. Just then, someone steps in, acknowledging the Count's decision with respect. That person turns out to be none other than Melon, the Vice Commander. Chris immediately senses that she's releasing magical pressure on him, at least 4th tier, but he's used to that kind of threat. He bows to greet her. She is caught off guard when she notices that he's withstanding her pressure without showing signs of pain. Chris tells her that if that's the impression she has of him, then he'll prove he's worthy of using the training grounds. She asks how he intends to do that, and he points toward Thurn and his group, suggesting a duel with one of them. She assumes he's joking, but he assures her he's completely serious, explaining that he has one condition. The duel must be fought with fists only, no magic involved, due to his weakened energy pathways from a life of excess. She becomes uneasy. She can't allow him to enter a fight that might injure him, especially since, at the end of the day, he's the Count's son. She asks if he truly believes he has a chance simply because it's hand-to-hand combat. He replies that the only way to know is to test it, then wonders aloud who the ideal opponent might be. He points to him, saying he'd make a fitting choice. Thurn takes offense, assuming he is mocking him. She steps in and tells Chris to choose someone else, since Thurn is already at the 2nd level. Chris is surprised to hear that, as reaching that level isn't easy, not even for those over 30. Still, he isn't worried. After all, he's no ordinary scoundrel. He tells her that if he really wants to prove himself, he needs to face someone stronger, making Thurn the ideal opponent. He then smiles and turns to him, asking if he's afraid. Thurn becomes even more enraged and agrees to the duel. The spectators gather to see what will happen, all cheering for Thurn, shouting at him to crush that disgrace. Chris sarcastically asks her how they'll determine the winner. Fed up with his arrogance, she declares that the winner will be whoever renders their opponent completely immobile, secretly hoping Thurn will break his leg. Chris starts provoking him, saying that if those are the rules, he'll beat him until he can't move. Thurn is livid and vows to silence him for good, but suddenly Chris lunges and delivers a solid punch straight to his face. Thurn is caught off guard by what just happened, while Chris laughs and says the fight has already begun. Thurn grows even more furious and rushes to attack, but Chris dodges with ease, thinking to himself that this almost feels like cheating. After all, as a mage, he hasn't even reached the 1st level. If this were a magic battle, he wouldn't stand a chance. But in a hand-to-hand fight, he has the upper hand, thanks to his vast combat experience from countless battles. Not to mention the level of light energy he achieved during his time in the punishment wing, which, by their standards, equates to the third tier. The young onlookers are stunned by what they're witnessing. No one imagined he could gain the upper hand over Thurn so easily. Chris keeps taunting him, asking if he's about to cry. Enraged, Thurn demands to know what trick he used. Chris, secretly delighted by his state, replies that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and maybe the real issue is just how weak he is. He then continues mocking him even more harshly. Thurn finally snaps and begins channeling his magic. He lunges at him, screaming that he'll kill him. As usual, Chris dodges without breaking a sweat. Thurn launches another faster attack, but it still doesn't land. Not only that, but Chris even blocks it with his bare hand. Thurn is stunned when he realizes Chris is using magical power. Before he can process what is happening, Chris slams a powerful punch into him, sending him flying. Thurn crashes to the ground, unconscious from the blow. Everyone around them is speechless, unable to believe what they've just seen. One of them wonders if Thurn underestimated his opponent, while another suggests maybe he held back his magic to avoid hurting Chris. But Melon knows full well that Chris won the fight fairly, and she is genuinely shocked. He turns to her and asks if that was enough to prove himself. When she confirms, he thanks her. He feels a quiet joy. He's finally caught her attention. Now he can gain access to sword techniques, magic, and everything else he needs. Time passes, and he finally reaches the first level of magic. He realizes it takes him a long time since he's still not used to handling mana, and there are many unresolved issues from the past he needs to address. He says that once he rises a little higher, he'll be able to control both light energy and mana together. At that moment, a strange creature appears out of nowhere. It turns out to be his personal maid. He is startled and remarks that someone like Christian would naturally summon a banshee spirit, Marie, as a maid. No human soul could handle his madness. He decides to deal with the matter later and asks the banshee to bring him some juice before he continues his training. She asks if human blood juice would be suitable, and he replies that he just wants regular strawberry juice. She moves closer, insisting that blood juice would taste far better. He becomes uneasy and firmly repeats that he wants strawberry juice, nothing else. As he steps out of his room, he's met by the servant Cox, who asks why he's going to train this early and remarks that he might be overdoing it. He adds that he's proud of him for working so hard, and that even when everyone else was accusing him, he always believed in him. Chris responds in a cold tone tinged with malice, saying he never asked for his trust and questions who he thinks he is to offer it in the first place. Cox is visibly shaken. He quickly apologizes, admitting he was arrogant and overstepped, then wishes the young master a good training session. Chris watches him walk away, still feeling uneasy. Something about Cox doesn't sit right with him. There's something suspicious behind that servant, and even his presence feels unnatural. Chris finally arrives at the training grounds and notices that the looks he's getting are no longer the same as before. He figures maybe now he can start talking to them a little, seeing as their attitudes seem to be softening. One of the demon trainees approaches Vice Commander Mellon and informs her that young Master Christian has also come to train today. She doesn't respond. She remains deep in thought about his intentions, especially after the duel he had with his brother. Thurn, his precision in targeting weak points, his use of mana despite his excellent movements, and ultimately his victory in that match, all suggested he could read the battlefield with absolute clarity. If her suspicions are correct, Christian might even be more talented than Lord Eske de Baron, the heir of the main family. But she quickly rejects that idea, convincing herself that Chris is nothing more than a degenerate scoundrel, with mana damage beyond repair by his corrupt lifestyle, and that this gap cannot be closed now. At that moment, she hears a commotion from outside, steps out of her tent, and asks what's going on, only to find the trainees all gathered in one spot. One of them tells her there's a simple duel taking place between young Master Christian and one of the trainees. She's shocked to hear the name Canon, since he's a first-star demon, which implies that Christian has reached the same level. Chris says he had hoped to test the skills of the so-called Great Black Swamp Knights, but finds them far below the reputation they're supposed to have. He asks if anyone is brave enough to fight him, then he provokes them further, saying they're clearly just a bunch of cowardly knights afraid to face real combat. One trainee can no longer stand the insult and steps forward, declaring he'll put an end to this. Chris laughs and tells him to come at him. Everything is going exactly as he planned, and they're all taking the bait without realizing it. They're now willingly teaching him the secret techniques of the knights. He had no other choice but to steal them this way. Chris focuses on the sword grip, the fluid footwork, and recognizes the style immediately. Mudblade, a technique he'd heard of before, and now feels confident he could imitate. And just like that, he defeats another knight, leaving everyone stunned. No one can believe the same scoundrel once labeled as weak has returned with this level of strength. He has reached the first star, even though his dark core was rumored to be broken. He addresses them, saying he's disappointed. He'd had high expectations of the knights. He then turns to Melon, telling her she's also responsible for their poor skills and low standards. The trainees are stunned by his boldness in speaking to the vice commander that way, as if digging his own grave. She responds, saying she understands he's excited over his unexpected victory, but believes he's letting it go to his head. Kai's replies that she's welcome to show him the true skills she claims the Black Swamp Knights possess. His words enrage her. She grabs a knight's sword and strikes toward him with force. He's unable to move, and the blade narrowly misses him. She tells him it would take her less than a second to take down an arrogant brat like him. Chris responds by asking if she really intends to use her full power on someone like him, and reminds her that first star black magic is forbidden. She replies that she doesn't need to use anything special. She could break both his legs with just half the strength she used. He tells her he's willing to wager both legs. Then he asks what she's willing to bet in return. She replies that she's ready to accept any terms because she's absolutely certain he won't be walking out of this place ever again. They begin their duel, and it quickly becomes a fierce and intense battle. He barely manages to keep up with the vice commander's relentless attacks. The knights watch with intense focus, surprised that anyone could last this long against her, though they assume it's only because she isn't using her main weapon. But Melon herself starts to feel something strange. Her strikes don't seem to be landing at all. What's more, it's clear that he doesn't match her in power, which makes the situation all the more puzzling. To her, the whole thing feels just like the fight he had with Thurn, as if history is repeating itself. He laughs and tells her things aren't going the way she wants, that the fight is moving in an entirely different direction. She snaps at him to shut up. She begins charging energy into her sword, preparing to unleash a powerful magical strike. He realizes this is the opportunity he's been waiting for. He rushes forward with incredible speed and slams his head into her face before she can launch her attack, forcing her to halt the strike. Shocked, she clutches her nose to stop the bleeding. Stunned by what just happened, he silently thanks his luck for the plan working. He knew she was a swordmaster who relied heavily on magic, and since dark magic at their level is forbidden, there would be a brief opening in her defenses. He chose that moment to strike. Given her talent with the blade, she might not have survived had he used a more lethal attack. Despite likely losing, she laughs and admits she never imagined a headbutt would be what ended the fight. She concedes that she underestimated him far too much, and from now on she'll take things more seriously. He replies that the fight is already over, pointing to a spot on her neck. He tells her he scratched her with his fingernail during the blow, and if it had been laced with poison, she knows exactly what the result would have been. She acknowledges her defeat and asks what he wants, then requests another duel. He gives her a sly look and says that if there's going to be a rematch, he wants something in return. She agrees to grant whatever he asks. He grins and says that in that case, she shouldn't mind kneeling before him. She is stunned by the request. She tells him he surely knows that such a demand is impossible. Her loyalty lies with the Baron family, the ruling bloodline of the Dark Magic clan. Chris replies that he's aware and also knows she was cast out of the main family, but that could change if he became the heir. She scoffs, saying that's absurd. The 5 recognized heirs are all direct descendants of the main bloodline. He responds with a comment saying, even a branch may become the root one day. He adds that, in any case, he accepts her challenge for a second match, but it will happen 1 month from now, without any restrictions. She agrees, warning him that if that's the case, he won't stand a chance. She will be the one to win next time. He smirks darkly and tells her sometimes, even an egg can crack a stone. Either way, they'll meet again in a month, and they'll see what happens. He then heads to his father and presents him with Vice Commander Melon's letter of recommendation, asking him to read it himself. He adds mockingly that the Vice Commander's basic skills as a demon are decent, but she could really use more training. Lord Khazar recalls when she came to him and said the young master was a genius, able to defeat those with solid foundations, even if their rank was low. She even admitted that he had defeated her personally, which deeply shocked Khazar. She continued by saying the duel had been thrilling, and she hadn't enjoyed a match like that in a long time. He looks at his son, wondering if he truly has changed this time, but Chris doesn't understand why his father is staring at him like that. In the end, Lord Khazar says that as promised, he will keep his word, and hands him the key to the library. Chris feels a sense of pride, having finally obtained the key to the library, and even managing to leave an impression on the vice commander. He was fully aware that she was a demon from the main branch of the Dark Magic clan, and during the Age of Ruin, she had risen to become a high-ranking 6-star demon who played a key role back then. That's why, if he intends to take control of the entire Dark Magic clan, he must first earn her loyalty. Though he's still not fully grown, he's confident that 1 month will be enough to prove himself worthy of it. Chris recalls the look Lord Khazar gave him before he left, and wonders if it might have been a sign of fatherly affection, meaning even demons have emotions within their families. He considers that maybe he can become a better father than the one he had in his past life, and decides he will make Lord Khazar proud. Chris enters the library to find it vast, filled with books on blood magic, summoning, and curse magic. He knew these books were strictly forbidden in the Land of Light. Just as he reaches for one, Banshee suddenly appears from between the shelves, startling him into jumping back in fright. He asks what she's doing here. She replies that this is her natural domain. She is, in fact, the library's keeper. This completely shocks him. She then asks if he came here just to spend time with her. This annoys him deeply. He has no idea how to deal with someone like her, especially since he's certain she won't leave him alone. Banshee informs him that the book he has picked is ranked 4 stars and falls under dark magic. Its title is Binding Seal. She adds that he probably won't understand much of it yet. He insists he's a genius and claims it won't take him long to grasp its contents. She remarks that not only is the young master handsome, but he's also a genius. Her expression carries something strange that he can't quite read. She then asks if there's a specific reason he chose that book. He nods and says he needs to catch a rat. By rat, he means one of 2 people, either his brother Thurn, whom he considers utterly useless and the person he hates most in the family, or Cox, the head servant, an oddly suspicious figure who has free access to the discipline wing despite not being a family member. Given that demons prioritize strength over status, it makes no sense for someone like Cox to try so hard to please Chris and stay close to him. This shady man might be something entirely different from what he appears to be. Chris still knows very little about Cox, but placing the hallucination stone in the discipline wing was clearly an act meant to destroy him. Because of that, he decides to pretend he's regressed to act like he's gone back to being the same foolish and impulsive person he used to be. The one who shows excitement or satisfaction at this change will surely be the true culprit. During training, he starts faking exhaustion from running. He pants loudly and waves off the drills, complaining that he's tired of all this nonsense. He mutters that he doesn't feel like training anymore. The other trainees are confused, exchanging glances and wondering what's gotten into him all of a sudden. Later, at dinner, he takes his plate of food, throws it on the floor, and yells at the maid. He scolds her harshly for not preparing a proper meal. With an arrogant sneer, he orders her out of his sight and demands that she return with something better. The scene erupts into tension, and Lord Khazar watches with burning fury. He slams his fist on the table and declares in a thunderous voice that he was a fool to believe he had truly changed. Now he sees clearly the boy has simply returned to his disgraceful self. Chris feels a strange twinge of guilt he can't explain, but he knows he can't let that stop him. It's something he must endure, all for the sake of the Khazar family. In the days that follow, he continues his performance, spreading the image of his old self. He mistreats the servants, throws tantrums, and spends money recklessly. Banshee, always hovering around, asks if he's truly returned to his old habits. She tells him gently that even if he has, she will remain by his side no matter what. He replies coldly that, as he said before, he intends to catch a rat. At that moment, he activates a magic skill. Glowing marks flicker briefly around his fingers, and Banshee gasps in astonishment. She stares at him wide-eyed, asking if he's already mastered the binding seal technique. He responds with confident ease, stating that he's a genius. Not only has he mastered it, but he has also modified the spell so that even lower-ranked demons can use it. He hasn't been wasting time. He's been learning other magical techniques during his spare hours as well. Her expression softens into admiration. She murmurs that he truly is a genius. But their conversation is cut short when Thurn storms into the room. Chris quickly changes his demeanor and spaces out, pretending not to have heard the door open. Thurn shouts at him, asking if he's gone back to his old disgraceful habits. He says he really believed he had changed, that he'd abandoned his reckless, spoiled ways. Chris smiles faintly. Thurn's confusion and frustration only prove he's not the rat. If he were, he'd be pretending delight, not anger. Chris responds with a calm voice, saying that he believes someone in the estate is trying to corrupt him again. That's why he's pretending he wants to catch whoever it is. Thurn narrows his eyes and asks if this is all just an act. Chris tells him to trust him and says this very act is proof that he's no longer the same person. Thurn then asks who he suspects the rat to be. Chris shrugs and says it's hard to say just yet, but the truth will reveal itself soon. Whoever is responsible won't be able to hide for long. With that, Chris leaves the room and heads directly to where Cox is. He catches the servant off guard. Cox looks up from a stack of papers, surprised to see the young master. Chris walks up to him and, without warning, pours a bottle of juice over his head. He glares and says this isn't the drink he asked for. He demands to know if Cox is now ignoring his orders. Cox quickly shakes his head and says he'd never dare. He promises to go immediately and fetch the correct one. Chris narrows his eyes and insists that only Cox must bring it to him. No one else. Cox replies that he's currently busy and won't be able to handle it right now. Chris stares him down and coldly says that if he can't do his job, then he might as well take the time to change clothes and come back later to finish his duties. Cox clenches his jaw slightly but restrains his frustration. He nods and says he'll go and return quickly. Chris watches him go, feeling the weight of suspicion grow heavier. No ordinary man endures humiliation this calmly. Either Cox is planning something or he has inhuman patience. Chris glances at the papers Cox had been reading just before he interrupted him. He senses something odd, as if he might be on the verge of uncovering something significant. If Cox truly is the rat, then he must be meddling with estate affairs as well. But suspicion alone isn't enough, he needs proof. Moments later, Cox returns, holding a fresh bottle of the correct juice. He sets it down respectfully and informs him that it's exactly what he asked for. Chris thanks him, smiling just enough to appear polite. Then, with a curious tone, he asks if he is angry with him. Cox replies smoothly that he could never be upset with a young master. Chris forces a fake grin and says people like him are his favorite kind. He thanks him again and adds, almost as an afterthought, that he actually has something important to tell him. Cox tilts his head, asking what it is. Chris says his friend had requested to meet him in secret at their usual place. Cox adds that he thought it best to let him know, though he warns him not to get too close to them. He explains that he couldn't refuse the request, since they are the young master's companions. Chris nods slowly and says he'll go meet them now. As Cox turns away, Chris thinks to himself that things are going even better than he had planned. He heads out to meet the so-called friends who requested his presence. They greet him with feigned smiles, pretending concern as they bring up rumors they've heard about his supposed change in behavior. But he pays little attention to their words. His eyes settle on a small girl standing by with a tray of drinks, clearly being used as a servant by them. The sight unsettles him. He instantly recognizes what kind of people they are: scumbags, no different from the old Christian he used to be. He takes a cup and raises it to his lips, but just before taking a sip, he catches a strange scent, faint but familiar. He abruptly smashes the cup into the man's face, shattering glass and splashing the drink across his skin. The man reels back in shock, holding his face, confused and frightened. He knows instantly that the drink was tampered with. The man's reaction leaves no room for doubt. Chris uses his magic to lull the little girl to sleep and lays her gently on a nearby bench. He doesn't want her to witness what he's about to do. Turning to the two men, he studies their now trembling expressions. Their masks are off. He can see their fear clearly. He begins slamming their heads against the table again and again, with such force they can barely breathe. He tells them to relax, letting them think for a moment that maybe nothing worse will happen if they just cooperate. Suddenly, Chris pulls a dagger from his pocket and raises it before their eyes. He binds them with rope and begins beating them with brutal efficiency. Their resolve crumbles quickly. They start sobbing and begging for mercy, promising to confess everything. They explain that someone ordered them to lure him out, drug his drink, and then kill the little girl to frame him for the crime. They had been blackmailed using the drugs they smuggled in secret and were forced into this mess under threat of exposure. He leans in and asks who gave the order. At first, they hesitate, but then his eyes grow colder. He makes it clear that silence will earn them nothing but death. Terrified, they blurt out the same name, Cox. Chris demands that they swear it, and they do twice, repeating the name without hesitation. Satisfied, he begins inscribing a magical seal into the air, binding them with an oath that forces their obedience from that moment forward. Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, Cox bursts into Lord Khazar's chamber. He claims that a disaster has occurred and insists Lord Khazar must hear it immediately. Lord Khazar listens grimly as Cox delivers his report that the young master, Christian, in a drunken state, murdered his maid and threw her body into the river. Cox adds that the situation is dire, that it could damage the family's name and cannot be ignored. Shaken by the claim, Lord Khazar orders him to bring Christ before the demon court, declaring that he will personally oversee the trial. The court convenes quickly, and Chris is brought before the judges. He stands confidently and declares that he's innocent, that none of what has been said about him is true. Lord Khazar demands to know if he is lying, pointing out that there are witnesses. He calmly replies that the event didn't happen to begin with, so the idea of witnesses is absurd. Just then, the courtroom doors swing open, and the little maid walks in. The room is stunned into silence. Chris gestures toward her and asks if this is the girl they claim to be dead. She confirms that she is indeed alive and explains that he had escorted her home after she fainted, even giving her money to pay her rent. She then turns and points directly at the two friends, stating that they are the ones who spiked the drink. The two men freeze, realizing too late that they've been outplayed. Chris activates the oath spell placed on them earlier. The moment the binding activates, they're forced to speak. Their mouths open against their will, and they confess everything. They admit that all the accusations were false, that they were paid by Cox to carry out the plan and frame Christ for the murder. Cox leaps to his feet, shouting in protest. He calls it a setup, a complete fabrication. He insists this isn't justice and accuses him of manipulating the court. His voice rises as he turns on Chris, demanding that he stop playing games. Chris, however, does not even spare him a glance. Instead, he turns to Lord Khazar and states that, as the victim, he has a request to make. Lord Khazar raises an eyebrow and asks what it is. Chris responds that he wishes to interrogate the accused Cox himself, without interference. Though taken aback by the unusual request, Lord Khazar agrees, warning him that if he misuses this authority, it will be stripped from him. Chris nods and steps up to the judge's platform. He stands tall and speaks with authority. He announces that, in the name of the Grand Judgment of the Magic Empire, in the name of the Demon King, and as a representative of Count Khazar of the Dark Magic Clan, he now begins the interrogation of the accused. He turns to Cox and asks if he swears to tell the truth. Cox, though suspicious, nods and swears. Chris asks him to swear again. Cox complies a second time, and the moment he does, Chris activates the Binding Seal, a modified version of the 4th star spell that can be used by lower-rank casters, but only if the target swears twice. The spell takes hold instantly. The crowd watches in awe, amazed that someone so young could wield such advanced black magic with precision. Cox finds himself magically forced to answer honestly. Chris asks why he tried to frame him. Cox, caught in the spell, involuntarily responds that he was ordered to do so and had been blackmailed into compliance. Chris asks who gave the order. Cox tries to resist, but the pain from the spell racks his body, breaking his will. At last, he confesses that it was Lord Asht who gave the command. Gasps fill the chamber. Lord Eskid de Baron, second son of the Dark Magic Clan's main family, was behind the attempt to destroy Chris. Cox begins to panic. He knows he will be killed for this betrayal and says he must flee immediately. But before he can make a move, Chris draws his sword and slashes his neck in one clean, swift motion. Cox crumples, lifeless, to the courtroom floor. Everyone in the room is left stunned by the sudden turn of events. Chris stands over the body, calm and composed, and declares that, on behalf of Count Khazar and based on the proven charge against Cox, he has carried out the proper sentence. He turns to his father, expression calm, and states that he has carried out the sentencing of the criminal, acting under the Count's authority. The Count Khazar doesn't reply immediately. His voice comes only after a short silence, and he asks why he made such a decision. Chris answers without hesitation. If they had kept Cox alive, the main family would have found a way to manipulate the evidence and cover up the entire incident. He doesn't want to give them the opportunity. It needs to be remembered unmistakably, undeniably. The best way to do that is through a clean and irreversible act like this. Let them all see. Within the courtroom, Thurn and Melon are also present. They've witnessed everything: the trial, the magical confession, the killing of Cox. Chris glances at them, smiling as he repeats to himself that he was framed by Eskid. His expression doesn't carry bitterness, it carries satisfaction. He struck first. The Count Khazar is out of words. For a few long seconds, silence hangs in the air. Then, without warning, he conjures dark magic and opens a portal beside him. He commands him to follow. Chris steps through the portal behind his father. They emerge together in a familiar place, the secret training ground, hidden from the estate and the prying eyes of the noble court. The Count Khazar turns toward him, his voice low and pointed. He asks whether his statement back in the courtroom means he intends to cause trouble for Eskid's succession. He reminds him that the support for the main family's successor is directly tied to the strength and influence of their own house. Officially, the Count Khazar admits that he made the right call today, but also insists that it was hasty. Now that the situation has escalated, he reveals his intent to support the young lady of the main family, because the first prince is nothing but a bloodthirsty madman. Supporting her is the safest route. Chris listens, then smiles. He makes his own proclamation that he will become the successor himself. The Count Khazar scowls. He dismisses it as nonsense, reminding him that he's a member of a branch family. But Chris counters, stating that even someone from a branch family can be recognized if they have the ability. That's how the rules work, nominally at least. If it weren't true, Eskid wouldn't go so far as to frame him or try to erase someone who isn't a threat. His father looks at him closely. He brings up the past, recalling how everyone once said his talents surpassed Eskid's. But now he says he has fallen far behind. Chris accepts that but says he'll catch up. He wants his father to use his authority to recommend him for participation in the Sacred Dark right 2 months from now. His father informs him that only those who are 2-star rank or higher are allowed to participate, and he, as things stand, has just barely achieved 1-star rank. But he replies with determination he will reach 2-star rank in 2 months, no matter what. And again, he asks his father for help. Days pass. The entire Khazar household begins to notice the shift. The servants murmur to each other that Christian Van has changed. Word spreads that the Count Khazar himself is personally training him. And now everyone is watching with interest to see how long Christian Van can endure the training. Chris trains intensely under his father's guidance. He practices the mud sword technique, a style focused on control. He blends it with the black scythe swordsmanship, slashing fluidly, executing clean motions. After one sequence, he asks if he did it correctly. His father doesn't respond immediately. Count Khazar is speechless. He can't believe Chris grasped the black scythe swordsmanship in one go even with guidance. That level of instinct and understanding is shocking. Chris then asks if the movements should be separated, or if there's a more efficient form. He demonstrates another move, charging toward a human-shaped mushroom, his practice target. With crisp execution, he performs a strike that merges both techniques into one motion. Count Khazar watches silently. The mushroom limbs are known for their durability. They should easily resist the mudsword. Yet they don't. The Count Khazar mutters under his breath, asking how it's possible. Chris answers without hesitation it's a technique of the midsword style, a sword form that carries only the blade aspect of the black sickle sword. The Count knows what that means. That technique shouldn't be usable at this rank. He calms his reaction, concealing his awe. He admits aloud that it's powerful, but he warns that using dual techniques will make it difficult to balance curse magic. But Chris brushes that off. For him, it's super easy. The Count doesn't show it, but he is stunned again. His son, once a reckless good-for-nothing, now displays a frightening level of adaptability. 2 weeks pass, Chris is drenched in sweat, gasping after a long run. He knows that to increase his rank, he needs more stamina. No shortcuts, no excuses. As he slows to catch his breath, a voice calls out, asking if he's already tired. It's Melon. She reminds him that the duel is approaching, and she's simply waiting for the promised day. Even now, standing still, she radiates intense pressure. He feels it clearly, but he smiles and answers that he's doing his best to meet everyone's expectations. She nods, acknowledging that his progress is impressive, but still he's only rank 1. She warns him that if he doesn't meet expectations, she will never have to kneel before him. He doesn't argue. Instead, he says that either way, it's a win for him. He believes there's something valuable to be learned from their duel, no matter the result. She laughs as she walks away. She teases that his mouth still works fine, and she reminds him to put up a good fight and entertain her. He watches her leave. He knows she is rank 4 upper. In rank 1, even with the subdivisions of upper, middle, and lower class, he has just barely reached upper rank. The gap between them is massive. But he is also a rich young master, what some mockingly call a wallet warrior. And that means he has options to push forward. The next morning, he summons Marie and asks if she packed the outing bag he requested. She, dressed in her usual outfit, beams with excitement. She proudly says yes, it's her first outing with a young master, and she prepared everything properly. He looks at her, surprised, and clarifies that he never said she was coming with him. She, smiling sweetly, insists he must be worried about her fainting in the heat. But she reassures him that serving the young master is her greatest joy. He sighs, annoyed, and asks her why a banshee would faint in the first place. He recalls that, a few days ago, he asked his father if he could switch to a human attendant. His father had refused, reminding him that he'd formed a master-servant contract with her. Without the contract, an upper-tier banshee like her can't be controlled. Chris had then asked how to cancel it, but his father revealed that the only way was through a deep kiss with her. Apparently, Chris had been drunk when he made the contract. Now, back in the present, he tries to explain that he's heading to a place full of people, so she can't come along. She looks genuinely sad. She says she's lived in the mansion for decades and was really looking forward to this. He's irritated again, but her words stir pity in him. He agrees to let her come, but orders her not to show herself in front of others. She lights up with joy and tells him he truly is a wonderful young master. He turns, telling her to follow him. As she trails behind, she asks where they're going. He answers vaguely. There's a place where they can make a good profit, he says. She, confused, reminds him that he's already rich. He replies irritably that he knows. She asks if he's aiming for land or gold instead of money. He says she's wrong, it's something different. Something he used to be very good at. Just as Chris and Marie are leaving for an outing, Turn suddenly appears. When Chris asks why he is there, Turn replies that he is there to keep an eye on Chris so he won't cause any trouble again. Hearing this, Chris gleefully says that there is nothing to worry about. The scene shifts to Chris holding two swords, a golden one and a strange broken sword wrapped in red chains and a black covering. Marie praises Chris's plan, saying he successfully purchased combat equipment for 200,000 rupees. She adds that the broken sword, Gruna, is a bonus. It is a holy sword once obtained by a hero who made a contract with the demon. Although the hero was later exploited, the sword remained in use and was greatly envied by demons, though it is now rusted. Chris interrupts her before she finishes and says he has a plan. He then hands her a charm, saying it is a gift since she had been staring at it for a long time and it might help her move on. Marie becomes emotional, saying that in her entire life, and even after death, no one has ever given her a gift. Chris tells her to go home. As Chris was sleeping soundly, Turn suddenly appeared and woke him up by pulling away his blanket. Chris, still groggy, says that he won the challenge last night and reminds Turn about the winner reward. So Turn should now be addressing him differently. He demands Turn say, "Honorable King Emperor Majesty Big Brother," since he lost. With a scowl, Turn mutters, "Honor. Honorable King Emperor Majesty Big Brother." The words filled with reluctance and annoyance. Chris beams with pride and says Turn should behave better from now on and treat his big brother with respect. With a fierce glint in his eyes, Turn mutters that he will make sure Chris regrets this one day, then leaves. As Chris watches him go, a cold thought creeps into his mind. This adorable kid may grow up to target him, and it must be because of Ashid, the son of Langham, the self-proclaimed patriot of the Dark Mage clan and the top-ranked heir. Chris thinks he has no emotional stake in this, but if he wants to become an heir, he cannot avoid confronting Ashid. He will settle this grudge not just for himself, but for his brother as well. But first, he needs Melon on his side to execute his plan. Gruna, the Holy Sword. Chris mumbles as he takes it out. Many mages have challenged this sword before, but all failed to tame it. Now, Chris wants to see how it will react to him. When he opens the chains and tries to hold it, the sword suddenly releases a burst of golden light and sparks. Chris knows the sword is designed to wield sacred power and reacts negatively to magic power, so its response is natural. It is still just a weapon. Chris then gets an idea. If he analyzes the sword carefully and breaks down the pattern that rejects magic power, he might succeed. So he takes out large hammers and starts striking the sword, telling it to give in. Otherwise, he can keep swinging all day. A few days later, Chris is in a secret training ground when he sees his father and younger brother standing with a familiar silhouette. Soon he realizes it is Merle, the commander of the Black Shadow Knights, daughter of the clan leader of the Dark Magic clan, and Count Merquis Langham's biological sister. Chris greets her respectfully. Merle is a major supporter of the clan leader and is in charge of secret missions and internal surveillance, making her a true powerhouse within the Dark Mage clan. Just as Chris wonders why someone as busy as her is here, his father explains that Lady Merle has come because of the Cox incident. Merle's eyes narrow slightly as she turns to the Count and asks whether he thinks the child's actions were not a bit too audacious. Chris's father keeps a neutral expression, but Chris's mind races. He wonders if the clan leader intends to protect Ashid as well, a troubling possibility. Chris remarks that the clan leader must have plenty of free time if he is paying attention to matters like this. Lady Merle responds with mild amusement, saying it is bold of him to speak that way. She explains that the clan leader does not concern himself with petty disputes, but Chris has successfully caught his attention. Chris's eyes shine with realization, his mind racing at the thought of gaining the clan leader's interest. Lady Merle's expression then turns serious, as she says she is still unsure whether Chris is brave or simply reckless. He has barely reached the 2nd star level, yet he dares to challenge Melon to a duel. She advises him to withdraw while he still can. Chris calmly responds that he appreciates her concern, but he already has a plan. With that, he draws Gruna, the blade glinting in the light. His aunt's eyes widen in shock as she asks if it is truly the Gruna. She knew he was reckless, but she did not expect this. In disbelief, she turns to Chris's father and reminds him that he had just been boasting about Christian finally coming to his senses, but this certainly doesn't seem like it. Count Khazar looks slightly panicked as he insists it is true, but Merle scolds him, saying that Chris still intends to use Gruna in a duel. Chris responds casually that no rule says he cannot use Gruna in the duel. He has to win, and the method does not matter. Merle then warns Chris that Gruna is a sword even the clan leader failed to wield, and that its holy energy could seriously harm him. Hearing this, Chris draws the sword fully with a confident smile, his eyes glinting with amusement. He tells Merle to watch closely as he reveals the blade, which shimmers with holy energy. In shock, Merle questions whether the sword is even real. Without hesitation, Chris tosses the sword toward her and tells her to check it herself. Merle catches it, but the moment her hand touches the blade, it bursts into golden light and sparks. She cries out in surprise and throws the sword back to Chris, unable to hold it. Her eyes widen as she asks how he managed it. Chris chuckles proudly, saying it is a trade secret. He cannot tell her, and that he is simply a genius who tamed a sword even the clan leader could not handle. His father's eyes widen with surprise, and a warm smile forms on his face as he looks at Chris with pride. Just then, Melon appears unexpectedly with a sly smile. Her eyes lock onto Chris as she tells him that it is delightful he thinks he has really tamed Gruna, but it will not matter because today will be his last day anyway. Melon strikes at Chris, and he barely manages to block the attack with his sword. He realizes that without any restrictions, her strength and speed are far greater than before. Internally, he admits that the gap between them could leave him vulnerable. Melon charges at him again, and when their swords collide, each weapon releases a distinct aura. Count Khazar and Lady Merle immediately notice it. Lady Merle comments that the holy sword is affecting the demon, while Count Khazar wonders if this is even more impressive than his sister's talent when she was a child. She also points out how well Chris is handling the holy sword. Chris finally manages to land a hit on Melon, and she groans in pain. Count Khazar wonders aloud if the demon is trembling under the influence of the holy sword. Lady Merle denies it, explaining that Chris is controlling the demon's energy carefully to prevent the holy sword from rejecting him. Meanwhile, Chris swings his sword upward, forcing Melon to slide back. Curious, Chris asks whether Melon is enjoying the fight. Melon admits she has been wondering whether he is truly predicting her movements. Chris replies that he pays close attention to such details and explains that in swordsmanship, every movement has a position and purpose. When a person performs a downward strike, they must raise their arm, and the muscles in the shoulder and upper arm must shift, something both beginners and professionals do. Unexpectedly, Melon unleashes a dark technique and challenges Chris to withstand it. A dark green aura spreads from her body and closes around Chris. She begins mentioning something about the Black Swamp Knights, but Chris's body emits golden energy that instantly nullifies her dark aura. He sighs in relief, saying that was close, and gratefully thanks his father. Melon wonders if he just used a purification artifact. Count Khazar faintly recalls that such an item should have been stored safely, but Chris happily admits he is skilled at sneaking things out. Lady Merle and Count Khazar look at him in disbelief. Chris then states that equipment power is also part of real combat skill and throws a corrosion orb into the air. The orb explodes, releasing black material in every direction. Melon shields herself with her sword. Chris throws another orb toward her, which detonates as well. Chris finds the artifact's performance impressive and thinks back to obtaining it with the money he took from Grantel. He calls out to Melon, telling her to show herself since he knows she survived. Melon charges through the flames with her sword, but Chris blocks her strike with the holy sword. Eventually, her sword can no longer withstand the clash and breaks apart, making Chris smile warmly. Count Khazar is amused and proudly says he now understands why Chris threw the corrosion orb into the air. He teases his sister that he told her so, while Lady Merle remains silent. Melon steps out of aura darkened and a wicked smirk on her face. She calls the duel fun and rushes at Chris again, eager to see his next move. Lady Merle notices that Melon has lost control and decides she must stop her immediately. Despite this, Chris skillfully dodges Melon's punch and maneuvers behind her, placing his sword gently but firmly against her neck to halt her advance. Confidently, he tells her he has won and asks if the battle was satisfying. Count Khazar beams proudly while Lady Merle covers her face with her hand. Suddenly, Melon laughs loudly and asks Chris if he truly considers this outcome a declaration of victory, joking that she still can't shake off the thrill. Chris then asks her to give him an answer to his proposal soon. He adds that he won, but if she isn't interested, he will respect her choice because loyalty cannot be forced. Melon addresses him as young master and asks whether following him would mean there will be more duels like this in the future. Chris nods, saying they can have as many as she wants, and helps her up from the ground. Later, Lady Merle stands by a window, thinking about the level of control required to manage demonic energy so precisely. She recalls a moment from her youth when she threw the holy sword aside, insisting she wanted nothing to do with it. She had asked whether such training was too much even for the head of the family. The family head explained that although it only lasts a short time, demonic energy constantly shifts its wavelength when manipulated. This means one must continuously adjust it to frequencies that demons cannot perceive. She asked who in the world could possibly accomplish that. The head answered that such control could only be achieved by a demon of Gehenna, a demon dragon, or a madman capable of handling demonic energy as naturally as breathing. Lady Merle then remembers Chris asking for her opinion on his power and wonders aloud whether he truly deserves top-class praise. In the present, she quietly reflects that perhaps her father's dream is finally beginning to come true. In the kitchen, the chefs are busy preparing food. An ogre chef carefully chops strawberries into 2 pieces and places them on a heart-shaped strawberry cake. Chris freezes when he sees him. He didn't expect that the strawberry cake he ate earlier was made by those very hands. Marie smiles and insists that despite the chef's intimidating appearance, he is exceptionally skilled at baking. The ogre chef leans toward Chris, curious about what brought him to the kitchen. Chris replies that he wants to make cookies. The chef repeats Chris' words to confirm, while Marie also grows curious. Chris explains that he wants to give someone cookies. Marie immediately leans toward him with teary eyes and asks if it's for another woman besides her. Annoyed, Chris says that although it is for a woman, it's nothing like what she's imagining. Marie puts an apron on Chris and stands him in front of the countertop, while the ogre chef insists that he can make excellent cookies. Chris, however, says he wants to make an effort by preparing them himself. Later, outside the main residence, Chris approaches Lady Merle just as she is about to mount her horse. She looks at him, curious about why he has come. Chris says he wanted to see her off. Lady Merle thanks him and adds that he must be tired from yesterday's duel. Chris brushes it off and hands her a box, telling her it is for her. She opens it curiously and finds cookies inside. Her eyes brighten, but she insists he didn't need to give her something like this. Chris smiles and says he was happy to see her, so he decided to make cookies for her. Count Khazar remembers Chris visiting him yesterday to ask about Lady Merle's favorite foods. He finds it admirable that Chris knows how to win people's hearts. Chris encourages Lady Merle to try the cookies and mentions that he made them himself. Lady Merle repeats his words in surprise, but after taking a bite, she covers her mouth, finding them delicious. She quietly mutters that they taste good, and Chris expresses relief that they suit her taste. Lady Merle then says she will repay him and asks what he wants. Chris instantly asks her to become his aunt. She reminds him that they are already blood-related and asks if he simply wants to call her aunt. She adds that she has heard Chris will participate in the Star Black ceremony. Chris nods, and she realizes he wants her support in the succession struggle. She gently rejects the request, explaining that the elders of the main house must remain neutral. Chris insists it was a sincere request because he wants to become closer to her. Lady Merle calls him bold and asks if he has any ulterior motives. Chris replies that if she cares for him enough to offer her help, he would gladly accept it. With puppy dog eyes, he tries to persuade her. Lady Merle laughs softly while taking another cookie. She admits that Chris' honesty is refreshing and adds that if he keeps giving his aunt delicious cookies, she will cherish him. Chris beams and thanks her. Lady Merle asks if she may taste these cookies again someday, but Chris says it depends on what she does for him. Count Khazar listens nearby, moved to tears by their warm interaction. Lady Merle still doesn't fully understand Chris, so Chris jokingly explains that if she disappoints him, he will sulk and won't make good cookies next time. Lady Merle sighs in relief and asks for his opinion on joining the Black Shadow Knights. Chris is stunned. Lady Merle explains that his performance in yesterday's duel was impressive, and she believes he may even have the talent to surpass a grandmaster. However, she warns him that his competitors won't be easy to face and worries he may fall before he gets the chance to shine. Chris calmly says that if he cannot overcome such obstacles, then he is not worthy of advancing. Lady Merle looks at him in surprise. Chris assures her he appreciates her concerns, but he does not believe he will lose. Lady Merle observes him closely and notes his confidence. She says she understands and adds that since he is a mage, she has no authority to stop him from choosing his path. She mounts her horse and warns him to remain cautious, especially around the first princess. Count Khazar asks if she means Yulia rather than Ashid and wonders aloud if Princess Yulia is the gentlest among the 5 royal heirs. Lady Merle says he will understand in time. Chris thanks her and says he will keep her warning in mind. Lady Merle smiles warmly, calls him her nephew, and says she will see him again soon. Later, inside his room, Chris lies on his bed, deep in thought. He notes that both Lady Merle and Count Khazar are strong, each holding the 6th rank. However, he never heard about their feats in the Great Battle. He wonders how many powerful people exist within the Magic Empire. At the very least, they must be strong enough to overcome the forces of light. But Chris refuses to let history repeat itself and clenches his fist with determination. 1 month later, Chris arrives at Count Khazar's office after being called. Count Khazar notices him and says there is something important he needs to discuss. His eyes widen when he senses that Chris has reached the 2nd rank. He asks Chris to confirm it, and Chris stands confidently before him. Count Khazar grows concerned, realizing how much Chris has progressed in just 1 month. Chris tells him to stay calm and reminds him that he had already promised to achieve this. Changing the subject, he asks what Count Khazar wants to discuss at this hour. Count Khazar stands and explains that the main house has contacted him. He informed them that he intended for both Chris and Turn to participate in the Holy Dark ceremony, but they only approved Turn. Count Khazar sighs and says Chris already knows the reason. He explains that they claim Chris wasted the family's wealth, got involved in trouble. These words strike Chris deeply, and he becomes lost in his thoughts. Count Khazar grows irritated at the main house for judging his son so harshly, while Chris remains quiet. Chris then asks if the decision came from Marquis Langham himself. Count Khazar denies it, saying the Marquis didn't comment much and that the decision was likely influenced by Ashit. The next moment, both Count Khazar and Chris say at the same time, Roni de Baron. Chris explains that Roni de Baron is a direct descendant of the main house and the central figure of the Holy Dark ceremony. The ceremony is a duel. Candidates share the pure darkness extracted from the dimensional shadow. Since the amount is limited, the candidates must compete in a deadly contest to determine superiority. Higher-ranking candidates end up monopolizing the greater portion of the darkness, which becomes the deciding factor in choosing the family's heir, the future prince. Chris believes achieving this position will be difficult if Roni monopolizes the darkness and becomes the sixth prince. Count Khazar approaches Chris and tells him to stay calm, promising to try negotiating with the main house. If that fails, he says he will even seek help from Lady Merle. Chris disagrees and insists he will handle everything himself. Count Khazar places a hand on Chris' shoulder and admits that Chris has changed and now shows great talent. He urges Chris to let the adults solve the matter. Chris smiles warmly at his father's words, but then his expression shifts into one of calculated determination. He tells Count Khazar that a scoundrel has his own way of handling things. Count Khazar asks if Chris has something in mind. Chris asks whether the Tyramin family is among the branch relatives participating in the Holy Dark ceremony. Count Khazar confirms and explains that the Count of Tyramin's third son will be participating. He angrily adds that this son also claimed Chris is not qualified to compete alongside Roni, describing Chris as an unreliable boy whose only talent is taming beastlings like a circus act. Chris finds his father's reaction somewhat endearing. He reassures him and says he will prove wrong all those who doubt his qualifications. He wonders aloud if the time has come for the Tyramin family to host the monster hunt. Chris declares that he will participate as a drive man in that hunt. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Lady Merle reports to the Lord Patriarch, informing him that she has returned after observing Chris as ordered. The Lord Patriarch asks for her assessment. Lady Merle replies that Chris is incomparable to others. The Lord Patriarch disagrees, recalling Chris as an arrogant boy who once believed himself a genius. Lady Merle insists that he has changed significantly. The Lord Patriarch then asks if Chris can fulfill his long-cherished wish. Lady Merle remembers that his wish concerns reversing fate itself and defying death through forbidden magic, the very reason he continues to cling to life. She says she is uncertain, but believes Chris might be the closest existence capable of fulfilling that wish. The Lord Patriarch finds this intriguing and says he will watch Chris carefully. He wonders if Chris will ultimately be able to participate in the Holy Dark ceremony. Lady Merle explains that the family has agreed against the decision and asks if the Lord Patriarch will intervene. The Lord Patriarch refuses, saying that if Chris truly has the strength of a rising beast, he will find his own way. Lady Merle objects, insisting that Chris is still very young and should be given a chance to grow by receiving the darkness in the holy ceremony. The Lord Patriarch speaks her name firmly, and she falls silent immediately. She reflects that he has always been this way. When his expectations are high, he becomes distant and strict. The Lord Patriarch notes that she seems to have taken quite a liking to Chris, which is why she is stepping forward like this. He then calls for his subordinate, who appears at once. His real name is Simon, the head steward of the Dark Mage clan. Simon asks why he has been summoned. The Lord Patriarch asks if he heard their conversation. Simon nods and asks if he is being ordered to observe Chris. The Lord Patriarch confirms and says that Simon must watch carefully to see what Chris does in order to participate in the Holy Dark ceremony. Simon bows and agrees to follow the command. Unexpectedly, he asks if he may play a small prank on Chris. The Lord Patriarch coldly warns him not to do anything excessive. Simon smirks and disappears, saying he will obey. On the other side, Lady Merle worries quietly, hoping Chris will succeed. At the Khazar estate, Chris sits in his room. He notes that he reached 2 stars quickly due to talent. but his stamina and magical reserves depend directly on training time, making 3 stars difficult to achieve. This is why he needs that monster's core, which helps accumulate magic in a short time. He wonders if fate will favor him and provoke the 3rd son of the Tyramin Count's family during the monster hunt. He reminds himself that capturing the beast Karatzo does not guarantee obtaining its core, as a special condition must be met. Later, he steps out of a carriage with Marie, and Grantel greets him nervously. Chris greets him and asks why he is empty-handed. Grantel panics and insists he isn't, showing a pouch of coins. Chris immediately throws the pouch on the ground. Grantel freezes as Chris calls it a pathetic excuse for a gift and asks if Grantel understands his own position. Chris grows stern, saying he has heard about Grantel's involvement in various illegal dealings. Grantel cries out, asking what Chris wants him to do. Chris says he will overlook it this time. Chris then says he needs something from him, the gray orb. Grantel screams in fright. He finally kneels and agrees to obtain the gray orbs for Chris. Chris nods and says he should have agreed from the start. He then winks at Grantel and asks him to bring a sharp dagger and some armor as well. Grantel looks confused as Chris gets back into the carriage and leaves. Inside the carriage, Marie asks if they are returning to the Count's estate, but Chris says he needs to stop somewhere first. After a short while, he tells the coachman to halt. Chris enters a potion shop, and the clerk greets him warmly. Standing at the counter, Chris thinks for a moment and tells the clerk he will take a certain potion. The next morning, Turn and Count Khazar arrive to see Chris off. Turn addresses Chris as brother, prompting Chris to remind him to use his proper title. Embarrassed, Turn then calls him the most honorable King Emperor Majesty Big Bro. Afterwards, Turn mentions he heard that the beast hunt is dangerous and tells Chris to be careful. Chris teasingly asks if Turn is concerned about him. Turn replies, annoyed, that he is only saying this because he would be disappointed if he couldn't have a proper duel with Chris. Count Khazar stops them from bickering and tells Chris to teach the Tyramin people a lesson. Chris confidently nods and promises they will return with good news. Count Khazar then leans toward Turn and curiously asks what the King Emperor title was about. Turn awkwardly responds that he doesn't need to know. Later, at the entrance of the Tyramin estate, a goblin butler informs them that they are not allowed to enter. Chris' subordinate angrily argues, saying they have been standing at the gate forever only for this to happen. Chris' goblin subordinate asks the butler if he even knows who Chris is. Chris listens quietly as the goblin butler explains that the order came from Lord Alros. Chris coldly asks if that means he must find his own place to stay in the capital. The goblin butler flinches and nervously nods. Chris' subordinate angrily offers to teach the butler a lesson, but Chris stops him. Chris calmly asks who will be paying for the hotel. The goblin butler nervously replies that he can charge it to the Tyramin family. Chris smiles brightly. Later, Chris and his servants arrive in front of a luxury mansion. The subordinate asks how much it will cost, and the goblin replies that it will be 100,000 lupe. Chris's subordinate freezes, while Chris proudly says that the chance to spend someone else's money does not come every day. He tells his servants to unlock everything within 1 hour. Suddenly, a sound comes from a briefcase, and Chris asks if they heard something. Marie bursts out of the briefcase and excitedly says the mansion looks amazing and perfect for Chris. Chris panics and asks why she is here. Marie confidently says she snuck in with his luggage because she is the maid who promised to stay by his side forever. Chris sighs and remains quiet. Marie laughs softly, teases him by saying his face looks adorable. Meanwhile, Alros, the 3rd son of the Tyramin family, shouts at Chris and demands to know why the bill is there. Chris thinks that this is their first time meeting, yet Alros is already speaking to him like this. Chris casually addresses him as the star of this year's monster hunt and reminds him that his servant told him to find his own place, so he shouldn't be complaining. Chris explains that a noble like him cannot stay in a cheap hotel, so he bought a nice estate, and asks if Alros is upset because his family is low on funds. Alros clinches the bill in anger, summons a controlled beast, and asks Chris if he has a death wish. Chris carefully observes Alros and notes that this is typical Tyramin-style beast control magic. He explains to himself that unlike the Alliance's taming techniques, Alros' technique is a form of black magic that controls beasts through fear and domination. Enchantments of confusion, dread, and excitement are combined to dull their instincts. But now, as Chris sees it with his own eyes, he realizes it is far more complex than he expected, and this is not something that can be mastered in a short time. Chris shrugs off the thought, wondering if he simply needs to defeat Alros first. He then tells Marie that if they're going to take down that beast, they will need a weapon. Marie laughs softly and hands Chris a wooden stick. Chris tells Alros to come at him like a demon. Alros shouts back, telling Chris to stop ordering him around and calling him a disgrace. He then sends his beast toward Chris. The beast roars and attacks, but Chris blocks it with his stick. The beast bites into the wooden stick until it starts cracking and forcefully knocks Chris to the ground. Chris sits up with the help of his stick and acknowledges the beast's power, adding that a 2-against-1 attack is cheap. He stands and tells Alros that if he wins against him, then he will join the hunt as a bodyguard, not as some beast driver. Chris calls Alros a sneaky cheater and says that he really needs to make this worth his time. Alros climbs onto the back of his beast and calls Chris arrogant, gritting his teeth as he declares that he will make Chris fall to his knees, begging for mercy. The beast charges toward Chris along with Alros. But when the beast strikes, Chris instantly disappears. Alros shouts in confusion, wondering where Chris has gone, just as Chris appears behind him and strikes him hard on the head with his stick. Chris repeatedly hits Alros on the head while Alros groans in pain. Chris steps back and twirls his stick in a circular motion. He asks Alros if it hurts and notes that he is not crying. Chris adds that even if he does cry, he will not go easy on him. Alros angrily tells him to shut his mouth. Chris then uses an illusion spell to frighten the beast. The beast sees a terrifying figure behind Chris and immediately becomes scared. Alros cannot understand what just happened to his creature. In the next moment, the beast hides behind Chris' luggage, its body trembling in fear. Alros also trembles. Chris teasingly explains that he only used a messy 2-star illusion spell and tells Alros that his weak beast control magic is not going to work against him. Alros gets up and draws another spell while telling Chris to shut up. He summons another beast, and this time it takes the form of a horse. Chris casually asks if Alros knows what the thing about delinquents is. Curious, Alros asks what he means, only for Chris to immediately throw his stick straight at Alros' forehead. Alros falls to the ground, while Chris explains that delinquents don't wait for transformations or casting times. Meanwhile, the horse beast is only half summoned. Inside the luxury mansion, in the background, Alros' servants stand and watch Chris closely. The goblin's servant wonders aloud why their lord instructed them to keep an eye on this scoundrel. Chris turns toward them and asks if they want to join in as well. He mentions that Alros has already been beaten by him and will not be able to get up until tomorrow. He winks and says he will let today slide, asking for their opinion. Both of Alros' servants grit their teeth, and the goblin's servant politely declines. Night falls, and the mansion grows quiet. Alros' servants watch Chris with disapproving looks. The other agrees and tells him to file their report and submit it so they can be done with it. They leave the room. Chris opens his eyes, gets up. He looks out the window and sees Alros' servants leaving. He wonders if they are about to make a move. Chris quickly takes out a cloak from his bag and tells Marie not to follow him, as he is going outside for a bit. Later, at the Kython mountain range, Chris notes that this is the hidden domain of House Tyramin. He thinks that, just as he has heard, the presence of demonic beasts here is overwhelming. He looks ahead, thinking there should be a hunting ground nearby. He eventually finds the hunting ground where guards are stationed at the entrance. Chris thinks the security is weak because only 2 guards are present. He uses his invisibility magic, thinking it was a good decision to learn it from Marie. Invisible, Chris easily passes through the guards and enters the hunting ground. After a short time, he reaches an altar. He steps onto it, wondering if this is where the darkness hunt reaches its climax. He finds it very unsettling, as its reputation suggests. But then he realizes the real issue and recalls his previous life. He remembers his companion Lena explaining that, in order to obtain the darkness, he needs to drive Karatso into extreme fear until the creature chooses to give up. She explained that opposites often converge, and that intense terror and ecstatic joy are separated by only a thin line. In that moment, worthless Ashen transforms into darkness. She further said that this is why House Tyramin which controls beasts through fear, leads the darkness hunts. In the present, Chris acknowledges Lena's words and thinks that, just as she said, he planned to steal House Tiraman's secret technique. Then he intended to use a mix of this new potion to push Karatsu into a frenzy and claim all the darkness for himself. However, Chris notes that he does not have enough time to steal and master their technique. He says there has to be another way. Suddenly, a spell circle appears behind Chris. When he turns around, he sees no one. After a short time, Chris reaches the entrance of a cave. He braces himself and enters, covering his head with his cloak. As he steps inside, he feels overwhelming malice and becomes annoyed. As he walks deeper, he finds a glowing red magic barrier. He is certain it is a high-level dark magic barrier and wonders if this is the Rift of Gehenna. He explains to himself that Gehenna is the world of demons and fiends. He is stunned to realize that a rift connecting it to the human realm exists here. Chris covers his mouth and wonders if he should lure Karatsu to this place. He takes out the potion, thinking he already has the bait. He crushes the bottle in his hand, saying it will be an exciting hunt. Meanwhile, a red bat hanging behind him notices Chris. The bat spreads its wings and transforms into Simon. Simon admits that spoiled Chris is quite interesting. He recalls that not only did Chris defeat the Tiraman kid, but he also played the fool to lower his observer's guards and then snuck into a forbidden zone to scheme something. Simon smirks, saying all of this makes him want to mess with Chris even more. Simon approaches the rift and places his hand inside, and a voice asks what it is that he seeks. Morning arrives, and Alrose fixes the flagpole in his hand. He, Chris, and 3 other men stand confidently with their flag. Chris teases Alrose, wondering aloud if he is acting tough after getting beaten by him. Annoyed, Alrose tells him to shut his mouth. Alrose mocks him back, saying Chris is the one posing. He notices Chris standing with Grunna and asks why he even brought that sword when he cannot use it. Chris teasingly replies that it is still better than Alrose's club. Alrose gets irritated and instructs his hunters to move out and lure Karatsu to the altar. The hunters acknowledge his command, and Alrose instructs the mages and guards to follow and wait at the altar. Suddenly, Chris notices the red bat, Simon, hanging from a tree. Alrose impatiently asks Chris to respond, so Chris acknowledges his instructions. Chris, Alrose, and their guards wait at the altar. One guard rudely tells Chris to sit in the corner and stay out of their way, calling him a nuisance. Chris happily agrees, saying less work means more fun, and adds that they should not come asking him to clean up their mess later. The guard gets angry and curses at Chris, while Alrose tries to calm him, telling him to save his energy for the hunt. Alrose instructs Chris to guard the flag in the corner, and Chris acknowledges. Chris sits leaning against a tree, curious to see how well they will manage on their own. He smirks, thinking everything is going according to plan. After all, he has the whitewood and the dagger Grantel gave him. The team's guard and Alrose suddenly notice movement. Chris thinks, it's coming. Karatsu finally appears, its eyes shining with. Chris is stunned and wonders why it looks like that. A teammate arrives and asks Alrose if he is ready. The guard urges them to begin the spell quickly. Alrose steps forward and casts his spell, and the other team members do the same from different directions. Karatsu loses its strength and lowers itself toward the ground. Suddenly, it roars and opens its mouth. Alrose is shocked. In the next moment, Karatsu hits Alrose hard, knocking him down. The guard rushes to Alrose and asks if he is okay. Karatsu continues screaming and releases poison from its tail. A teammate shouts that it is poison. The guard tells another to create a defensive barrier immediately. The blue-haired teammate forms a barrier around himself and the others. On the side, Chris thinks this will not work because Karatsu has already gone out of control due to the potion. Karatsu breaks through the barrier. Alrose, covering his nose, says he took the antidote beforehand, but they will all be in danger if this continues. The gray-haired teammate yells for everyone to restrain Karatsu. Karatsu strikes another teammate, who screams loudly. A teammate calls out to Alrose in panic as Karatsu is about to hit him again. Alrose shields his face, but Chris rushes in and blocks Karatsu with Grunna. Chris tells Alrose that House Tiraman must be quite something if the person guarding the flag has to jump in. Chris adds that if Alrose starts calling him Hyung, he will help him. Alrose grits his teeth and calls him a psycho. As he tries to speak further, Chris cuts him off and asks what he is planning to do. He points out that Alrose does not have many options left and that all the other teammates are in terrible shape. Alrose, frustrated, tells Chris to help him. Chris smirks and reminds him to keep his promise. In the next moment, Chris strikes Karatso, then casts a spell that binds it. Curious, Alrose asks how Chris knows binding magic. Chris calls Alrose arrogant and wonders aloud if he thought he was the only one who could use such spells. Chris notes internally that this is not even a secret technique, just mid-level binding magic. With the chains, Chris restrains Karatso and climbs onto its back. Karatso screams as Chris begins riding it. Chris and Karatso rush toward the cave. Alrose shouts after him, saying something about Gehenna. Chris simply smiles back at him. After a short time, Chris reaches the cave with Karatso. Karatso screams again, and Chris asks if it is feeling the malice of Gehenna for the first time. He tells it to go ahead and be as terrified as it wants. Karatso looks up, and Chris disperses the chains surrounding it. Then he draws his dagger, strikes the monster. Meanwhile, Alrose and the rest of the team arrive near Chris. Alrose explains that the cave is dangerous and they must leave immediately. Chris wonders aloud if he is truly scared and asks what he plans to do about it. Chris then shows them a silver orb and tells them that it is not darkness, but ashen. One of the team's guards yells at Chris, cursing him and wondering if, had he not jumped onto Karatso, they would not have ended up inside the cave. Unexpectedly, Alrose stops the guard and tells him to let it go. He reluctantly addresses Chris and thanks him for saving his men. Chris widens his eyes in surprise. Alrose explains that it was because of Chris that they were able to get through the situation without any casualties. Chris feels a pang of guilt, knowing he was the one who orchestrated their gathering. He reflects that his act of swiping the darkness mid-fight is making him feel uneasy and wonders what that says about him. Determined to see things through, he leans toward Alrose and reminds him of his promise, telling him to call him Hyung. Alrose startles and asks what he means. Chris presses, asking if he is going to break his promise. Alrose stammers, saying he never promised that, and begins to mention their age difference. Suddenly, the cave shakes violently, freezing both Alrose and Chris. Their teammates kneel to the ground, covering their heads, while one stammers, asking Alrose what is happening. Alrose himself has no idea what is occurring. Chris widens his eyes, thinking this shouldn't be happening. A dark red aura emanates from the spell barrier, and the shadow of a massive beast with glowing blue eyes appears. Chris starts sweating as he sees the beast materialize right before his eyes. A huge, ogre-like demon emerges, and, upon seeing Chris and his teammates, Chris thinks internally that this is a demon from Gehenna. Alrose positions himself between the demon and Chris, his body trembling with fear, but still insists that Chris, as an outsider, needs to retreat. Chris suddenly notices the red bat hanging upside down from the cave ceiling. He quickly grabs his dagger and throws it at the bat. Upon being struck, the red bat disappears. Elsewhere, Simon, who has been observing the cave through the bat, is stunned. The footage vanishes, and he wonders when Chris noticed it. Simon thinks to himself that he had planned to lure the demon out after completing his observation, but now the teleporting bat has been eliminated. If he delays, not only could his young master Chris get hurt, but the demons inside might die as well. Simon immediately disperses into the air and heads toward the cave. Meanwhile, inside the cave, the demon asks Chris what he intends to do. Chris smirks, saying he simply hates being spied on. The demon laughs, remarking that a person on the brink of death should not worry about such things. Chris recalls the demons he faced in his previous life and senses that even if the demon before him is low-ranked, it is surely at least a 5-star demon. Internally, Chris admits that, in his current state, he stands little chance, but he remains determined to act. He points upward, and the tip of his finger begins to glow. A blue energy aura spreads around his teammates, putting them to sleep. Suddenly, Alrose shouts at Chris, asking what he is doing and insisting that they need to work together instead of wasting his power. Chris sighs, noting that Alrose possesses serious magic resistance. Chris punches him hard, telling him to shut his mouth and sleep. The demon leans in and asks Chris if he intends to sacrifice his teammates. Drawing out Gruna, Chris remarks that the demon talks too much. He tells the demon that he has a strict rule against anyone messing with his kind and points Grunna toward it. The demon instantly recognizes Grunna and calls Chris' boldness impressive. It adds that if it cannot wield Grunna, it is nothing more than scrap metal and begins emitting a dark red aura from its hands. Chris struggles to block the aura with Grunna and falls to the ground under its impact. Weakly, he looks toward the demon, which stands tall and demands that he surrender his teammates in order to be spared. The demon holds Chris up near its face. The demon calls him a worm, while Chris challenges it, asking whoever said he couldn't wield the sword. Chris then frees himself from the demon's grasp and lands on the ground, activating Grunna with the power of light. The demon is stunned. How can a demon wield the power of light? Chris taunts, asking if it is panicking now. Enraged, and emits more dark energy from its 4 hands, forming a massive, dense red aura ball near Chris. Positioning himself carefully, Chris uses Dead Sea Flash and strikes the red aura. Golden light spreads, and the demon freezes in disbelief, unable to comprehend what is happening. Chris destroys the massive red aura and strikes the demon hard. Breathing heavily, Chris admits internally that his body cannot endure this much and collapses to the ground. He recalls Evan, who had been stunned to learn that Chris copied the Dead Sea Flash after seeing it only once. Chris had struggled just to execute the pose correctly, asking Evan if he was performing it right. Evan shook his head and sighed, calling him unbelievable. He explained that the Dead Sea Flash is a single, precise strike of light capable of breaking through the Dead Sea itself. Evan added, with disappointment, that even after executing the technique, Chris was not yet worthy of the light of Housemeyer, but insisted that Chris might truly be the light capable of saving the world. A blue hand with long nails taps on the surface of the water, producing a sharp sound. It belongs to a demon lady who calls Chris' power fascinating and introduces herself as Mepana. Meanwhile, rescuers arrive. One man shouts that he has found the participants and urges the others to hurry while bringing all the potions. Mepana states that she is the first seat of the 7 circles of Gehenna and adds that she will be watching Chris with great interest.